By the end of the 3rd century, Rome was no longer eternal. It was unraveling from the inside. Civil war, famine, and plague haunted the empire. Barbarians pressed on its borders. Generals crowned themselves emperors, and emperors fell before their statues were even carved. In just 50 years, more than 20 emperors had ruled, and most died violently. Then came Diocletian, a hardened soldier not born of noble blood, but forged in chaos. He seized power, not by birthright, but by blade. And with it, he saw the truth that others denied. Rome had become too vast, too unstable, for one man to control. His solution was radical. He would not shrink the empire. He would divide it, not in 2, but in 4. He created the Tetrarchy, 2 senior emperors called Augusti and 2 junior Caesars beneath them. 4 rulers, 4 capitals, 4 armies, a design meant to prevent chaos, to enforce order, and to guarantee peaceful succession. On the surface, it was brilliant. The empire, long drowning in blood and betrayal, finally had structure. But beneath the order, tension simmered. Trust was paper thin. Each man was loyal not to Rome, but to his own power. The Tetrarchy wasn't a system, it was a standoff. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, Diocletian did the unthinkable. He retired, voluntarily, the first Roman emperor to ever step down. He vanished into a palace by the Adriatic Sea, where he spent his days gardening, while the empire he tried to fix began to fracture. His gamble had bought Rome time, but time was a luxury the empire could no longer afford, because power shared is power desired. And as new Caesars rose with sharper ambitions, the unity Diocletian built began to rot from within. He had tried to divide Rome to save it, but he may have only delayed the inevitable and written the first chapter in its long, bitter end. The ink on Diocletian's grand design had barely dried when the cracks began to form. 4 emperors sworn to unity, yet each one armed with ambition sharp enough to cut marble. The Tetrarchy was supposed to bring peace. Instead, it became a battlefield of egos. When Diocletian and his co-emperor Maximian retired in 305 AD, the balance was broken. The new Caesars, Galerius and Constantius, took the mantle of Augusti. But beneath them, the chosen juniors were not the sons of emperors, nor the favorites of Rome. And that was the problem. In the shadows stood a young man, Constantine, the son of Constantius. A soldier, a strategist, a man born in the barracks, not the palace. He had the loyalty of the legions, the blood of a ruler, but none of the recognition. When Constantius died suddenly in 306 AD in distant Britain, his troops didn't wait for Rome's approval. They raised Constantine on their shields and hailed him emperor. But he wasn't alone. In the west, another usurper rose, Maxentius, the son of the retired Maximian. And in the east, Galerius burned with fury, watching the Tetrarchy twist into chaos. Within months, there were not 4 emperors, but 6. Every promise Diocletian had made, every safeguard, every law, shattered. Alliances shifted like sand. Fathers turned on sons. Generals switched sides in the middle of battles. The empire had become a chessboard soaked in blood, and each Caesar moved his armies with trembling hands and poisoned intent. The Tetrarchy, meant to ensure peaceful succession, had become a civil war. And behind every maneuver was betrayal, cold, calculated, and inevitable. The Caesars no longer served Rome, they served themselves. As swords clashed from the Rhine to the Nile, one thing became clear: there could be no compromise. Only one ruler would emerge from the ruins, and in the distance Constantine watched, waiting, ready to strike. He was never supposed to rule. Born in the shadows of imperial politics, Constantine was a pawn in the game of emperors. The son of Constantius Chlorus and a woman of humble origins, Helena, he was raised far from Rome's golden halls, shaped not by luxury but by the brutal rhythm of the military camps. As the Tetrarchy wobbled, Constantine's moment came not through politics, but death. When his father fell in distant Britain in 306 AD, The legions acted swiftly, defiantly. They raised Constantine on their shields, declaring him Augustus before Rome could speak. In the east, the so-called rightful emperors seethed. To them, Constantine was a usurper, a soldier with a bloodline, but no legitimacy. But to his troops, he was a leader forged in fire. And to Constantine, this was destiny. The empire spiraled into madness. Maxentius, the spoiled son of the former emperor Maximian, seized Rome for himself. Licinius and Galerius held their fractured eastern courts. And in the middle of it all stood Constantine, young, calculating, and patient. He didn't just march toward power, he engineered it. Piece by piece, he won loyalty, first from the legions, then from governors, then from the people. He knew that Rome's heart beat not just for emperors, but for victors, and Constantine planned to be both. In 312 AD, he marched on Rome, not as a rebel, but as a reckoning. Maxentius waited behind the ancient walls, arrogant and certain. But Constantine brought something new to the battlefield, something Rome had never seen before, a cross. According to legend, the night before the final battle, Constantine saw a sign in the sky, a blazing symbol and words etched in light. In this sign, conquer. Whether vision or strategy, it became his weapon. He ordered his men to paint the Chi Rho on their shields, a Christian emblem in a still pagan empire. The next day at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, the Tiber ran red. Maxentius drowned in retreat. Constantine entered Rome, not as a conqueror alone, but as a chosen one. And from that day forward, the rules of empire changed. He was no longer just a general with ambition. He was Constantine the Great, master of the West, and the man who would reshape the soul of Rome forever. The empire had seen wars. It had survived plagues, invasions, and betrayal. But it had never faced a threat like this, a revolution of the soul. When Constantine seized power, he didn't just inherit an empire, he inherited a crisis of identity. The old gods of Rome were fading, their temples empty, their priests irrelevant, and rising beneath them was something dangerous, something divine. Christianity, once hunted, now unstoppable, the followers of Christ were multiplying in shadows and streets. Their faith, once whispered in catacombs, had become a movement too large to ignore. Constantine didn't ignore it, he embraced it. With the stroke of a pen and the edge of a sword, he signed the Edict of Milan in 313 AD, granting freedom to Christians and legitimizing their once forbidden faith. But this was no gesture of tolerance, it was a masterstroke of power. By aligning himself with Christianity, Constantine reshaped loyalty, not just to emperor but to God. A new Rome was rising, one built not on Jupiter or Mars, but on crosses and cathedrals. And the empire began to fracture. In the West, where old traditions still held sway, senators and citizens alike clung to the pantheon. They watched with suspicion as Constantine baptized bishops with influence and turned altars into centers of law. In the East, things changed faster. The Greek-speaking provinces welcomed the shift, weaving Christianity into their politics, their philosophy, their culture. Temples fell, churches rose, and with them, a new elite, clergy, scholars, saints. But beneath this spiritual awakening, a dangerous divide was forming. What began as unity under one God became a battle of interpretations. Was Christ divine or mortal? Was the Trinity heresy or truth? Constantine summoned the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD to settle the debate. But the cracks had already deepened. Different doctrines, different bishops, different visions of truth, now drawn along cultural, regional, even imperial lines. The East and West no longer spoke the same spiritual language. And while Constantine built his shining new capital, Constantinople, the city of the emperor and the cross, the old Rome, the pagan Rome, looked increasingly like a relic. The holy divide had begun. It wasn't marked by walls or armies, but it was just as powerful. A silent fracture of faith, of identity, of destiny. And once split, the soul of Rome would never be whole again. In the final days of a united Rome, one man stood at the center of a crumbling world, a warrior, a believer, an emperor desperately holding together an empire tearing at the seams. His name was Theodosius I, and he would be the last man to rule both East and West. When Theodosius rose to power in 379 AD, the empire was already wounded, bleeding from the chaos of internal strife, religious upheaval, and barbarian pressure. But what made him different wasn't just his military brilliance, it was his conviction. He was no longer merely Caesar, he was a crusader. Under Theodosius, Christianity became more than a state religion. It became the empire's beating heart and its sword. He outlawed pagan rituals, shuttered temples, and enforced orthodoxy with imperial wrath. No longer would Rome tolerate division in the church. Heresy became treason, faith became law. But beneath the sacred fire of his rule, the tectonic plates of empire were shifting. In the West, the armies were thin, the coffers empty, the people weary. In the East, wealth flowed from the cities of trade, and the imperial machine, centered in Constantinople, was efficient, hardened, and proud. Theodosius tried to keep both worlds spinning in unison. He fought wars in the West. He governed from the East. He crowned his sons as co-emperors, trusting blood to preserve balance. But blood is a fragile bond in a crumbling world. And then, in 395 AD, Theodosius died. No warning, no succession plan beyond titles and teenage heirs. And with that final breath, the door was shut. The empire, never officially divided, was now ruled by two boys in two cities with two separate courts, armies, and ambitions. One in Rome, one in Constantinople. The illusion of unity vanished overnight. The West descended into chaos, its young emperor Honorius manipulated by generals and courtiers. The East, led by Arcadius, withdrew into its fortified wealth, watching from afar as its twin brother began to rot. Theodosius had tried to bind the empire with faith, but faith alone couldn't hold back time, politics, and power. And as the curtain fell on his reign, it marked the end of an era, the last heartbeat of a singular Roman Empire. The body had not yet collapsed, but the soul had already split in two, forever. The Western Roman Empire did not die with a bang. It bled out slowly, from 1,000 self-inflicted wounds. After the death of Theodosius, the West became a ghost ship, drifting under the command of child emperors, hollow titles, and puppeteer generals. And in the shadows of Rome's crumbling glory, wolves circled the gates. But the true enemy was not just the barbarian beyond the frontier, it was the Roman within. As the 5th century unfolded, power in the West shifted away from emperors toward warlords in uniform. Men who wore the eagle of Rome, but served only themselves. The Senate, a relic. The emperor, a figurehead. The true rulers were men like Stilicho, a half-barbarian general who defended the empire, until he was betrayed by the very court he saved. And while Rome devoured its own protectors, new kings rose from beyond the Rhine. The Visigoths, led by the cold and calculating Alaric, had once served as allies of the empire. But they were no longer content with scraps. They wanted land, they wanted gold, they wanted vengeance. And in 410 AD, they took it. Alaric marched on Rome, not just to conquer it, but to humiliate it. The Eternal City was sacked for the first time in 800 years. Its treasures looted, its illusions shattered. Rome was no longer untouchable. The floodgates opened. The Vandals stormed through Spain into Africa, seizing Carthage, the breadbasket of the empire. The Franks carved out kingdoms in Gaul. The Huns, led by the terrifying Attila, thundered across the Danube, demanding tribute like emperors of old. Each blow chipped away at the Western Empire's skeleton. But the final betrayal? It came from within its own walls. In 476 AD, the boy emperor Romulus Augustulus was deposed by a Roman general named Odoacer, a man of barbarian blood, yet Roman command. There was no great battle, no last stand, just a quiet handover of power. The Roman Empire in the West simply ended. But did it truly fall, or was it slowly, methodically replaced, not by conquest, but by transformation? Rome didn't explode. It dissolved. And as the dust settled, one truth remained. The enemy had not stormed the gates. The enemy had been welcomed in long ago. As the West collapsed into silence, the East began to sing. While Rome burned, Constantinople fortified. While emperors in the West begged barbarian warlords for peace, the East forged alliances, gold and steel. This was not a survival. This was a rebirth. Out of the ashes of a fractured empire, a new colossus emerged, leaner, wealthier, sharper than its bloated predecessor. It bore the same name, Rome, but it was Byzantium now, and it would endure. Its heart was Constantinople, a city carved from vision and ambition, a fortress between two worlds, built by Constantine himself. Encircled by 3 layers of walls, guarded by a chain across the sea, and crowned with golden domes that shimmered like the promise of heaven. And its soul was strategy. While the Western Empire drowned in its own decadence, the East became a machine, refined, calculated, relentless. Gone were the naive days of open battlefields. Byzantium learned to fight with coin and cunning. They bribed kings, played rivals against each other, and turned invaders into pawns in a grand imperial game. But when it needed to strike, it did so with terrifying force. Under Emperor Justinian, the East launched a bold dream to take back the West. Led by the brilliant general Belisarius, Byzantine forces swept through North Africa, reclaimed Italy, and stood once again in the ruins of Rome. The phoenix had not just risen, it had come to reclaim its legacy. Byzantium didn't just survive, it transformed. Greek language replaced Latin. Christian orthodoxy became its unshakable foundation. Art, philosophy, and law flourished, culminating in Justinian's legal code, the backbone of Western justice for centuries to come. And while barbarian kingdoms fought over scraps in the West, the East stood tall for 1,000 more years. But make no mistake, this was no longer the Rome of Caesars. It was a new empire, one born not of marble and togas, but of icons and intrigue. A Rome reimagined, a phoenix cloaked in purple and flame, and the world would come to know its name, Byzantium. History remembers emperors, but in the shadowed halls of Constantinople, it was often the empresses who ruled. They wore no crowns in battle, yet they shaped wars. They commanded no armies, yet kings bent to their will. They were not ornaments of power. They were its hidden architects. The most feared of them all? Theodora, a woman born in poverty, raised in scandal, and transformed into an empress who shook the empire to its core. She was Justinian's wife, but no mere consort. She was his co-ruler, his strategist, his shield. When riots consumed Constantinople and senators begged the emperor to flee, it was Theodora who stood unflinching. "Purple makes a fine burial shroud," she said, and Justinian stayed. It was her resolve that saved the throne, her mind that helped build an empire, and her name that would echo through the centuries in whispers of both awe and fear. But she was not alone. There was Irene of Athens, who ruled not beside an emperor, but in place of one. She blinded her own son to keep her grip on power, and became the first woman to rule the empire in her own name. To the west it was heresy. To the east it was unprecedented. But to the people she was Basilissa, Empress of the Romans. And there were others. Zoe, who married 3 emperors and outlived them all, ruling the empire through poison, plots, and whispers in the dark. Anna Komnene, who didn't take the throne, but wrote one of the greatest historical accounts of the Byzantine world, her words as sharp as any sword. These women were no passive figures. They were politicians, theologians, spies. They pulled the strings behind golden curtains and velvet thrones, shaping empires from the shadows. In the East, where icons were venerated and heresies debated, these empresses mastered the delicate balance between power and piety. They built churches, They commanded loyalty. They endured betrayals and delivered their own. While the Western Empire collapsed under the weight of weak rulers and lost ambition, the Eastern Empire stood firm. Because behind every trembling emperor, there was an empress with iron in her spine. These were the hidden sovereigns of Byzantium, forgotten by many, but never powerless. In a world ruled by men, they redefined what power meant and rewrote history in their own hand. In 426 AD, they called it the end of Rome. The last Western emperor, Romulus Augustulus, a boy dethroned by a barbarian warlord named Odoacer. No last stand, no grand funeral, just a quiet signature, and an empire vanished, or so they said. But Rome didn't die. It mutated, it survived, hidden behind new names, new titles, and new thrones. Because in the East, the eagle still soared. Constantinople, the new Rome, was thriving. Gold flowed through its streets. Greek and Roman ideas lived on in its schools. And emperors still called themselves Caesar. Centuries after their Western cousins had fallen into legend. The laws of Justinian, written in Latin, became the legal backbone of Europe. The Roman Senate was gone, but the Byzantine court was more powerful than ever. They wore silk instead of togas. They spoke Greek instead of Latin. But the fire of Rome still burned in every marble hall and mosaic dome. And far beyond Byzantium's walls, Rome's legacy spread like wildfire. In the forests of Germany, the Holy Roman Empire rose, clinging to Roman titles without Roman blood. In the Vatican, the Pope sat in Rome itself, wielding spiritual power once claimed by emperors. Even the barbarians who once sacked the empire began calling themselves kings by divine Roman right. And then came Charlemagne, crowned Emperor of the Romans by the Pope in 800 AD, a bold, defiant echo of a past that refused to die. Rome had become an idea, a ghost in the foundations of every kingdom that came after, a dream of order, of law, of eternal rule, and it endured. In the East, the Byzantines called themselves Romioi, Romans, until the day Constantinople fell in 1453. Nearly 1,000 years after the so-called fall, even then the flame passed again, to Moscow, which styled itself the Third Rome. One empire falls, another rises, the soul remains. Rome never truly fell. It adapted. It outlived its conquerors. It became immortal, not in marble or sword, but in memory, law, faith, and empire. The West buried an emperor, but the East carried the torch. And the world, whether it knows it or not, still walks in the shadow of Rome. They shared a name, a legacy, a bloodline of emperors. But when the West cried for help, the East stayed silent. It was the 5th century. The Western Roman Empire was collapsing. Cities in flames, borders overrun, emperors falling like dominoes. Barbarian warlords weren't knocking at the gates anymore. They were inside, carving out kingdoms. The West turned to its eastern twin, Constantinople, the beacon of wealth, stability, and power. Surely the East would come, but no help came. Why? The truth is colder than marble and sharper than steel. The East chose survival over sentiment. In Constantinople, behind walls taller than ambition and thicker than loyalty, Emperor Zeno watched as the Western Empire bled out. He calculated, not with his heart, but with cold imperial math. Why send armies to defend a crumbling ghost? Why drain coffers to save a city already lost to decadence and decay? So when Odoacer deposed the last Western emperor in 426 AD, the East offered no resistance. Zeno didn't send legions, he sent congratulations. The Eastern court accepted Odoacer's rule. Officially, they acknowledged the barbarian king as Rome's new governor, an unspoken death certificate for the Western Empire. It wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. The city that had ruled the known world for centuries was now just a memory. No thunder of legions, no banners, just silence from the East. And yet the betrayal wasn't sudden. It had been coming for decades. When Rome was first sacked by the Visigoths in 410, The Eastern Emperor had offered sympathy, not soldiers. When Africa, the breadbasket of the empire, was seized by the Vandals, Constantinople looked the other way. The East had built its walls high and its heart higher. And while the West clung to decaying marble, the East fortified its bureaucracy, guarded its gold, and turned its gaze toward Persia and the rising threats in the East. By the time the West truly fell, the East had already moved on. Two empires once born of one vision. But when the fire came, one chose to burn with honor, and the other chose to survive in silence. And thus, in the shadows of history, Rome betrayed itself, not with a sword, but with a whisper, a nod, and a closed gate.